Okay, we're going to get things fired up here. My name is Tom Suter. I'm the founder of the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center, and welcome to our Integrated Cyber Strategies Virtual Summit. And really excited to do this. We've done these one-off events on different aspects of cybersecurity, and we're looking at this as the event to kind of pull it all together. And I think that we see a lot of the CISOs and a lot of the community has the same problem. So I'd like to thank our partners over at Fortinet, great group of folks. They've been a great partner of ATARC's, and specifically like to thank our good friend Shelly Scarpelli, Jim Richburg, and Jonathan Nguyen Dai for all their help putting this together. I'd like to thank all the panelists that are coming here today. I would like to thank all the participants taking time out of your busy weeks to join us today. So first up, we'll get right into it. Our keynote speaker today is Jerry Karen. Jerry is the Director of Enterprise Network Management over at the Bureau of Information Resources at the U.S. Department of State. And Jerry is also the government chair of our Zero Trust Working Group. Jerry, can you come online? Jerry Karen, come online.
Afternoon, Tom.
Hey, good afternoon there, Jerry. How are you doing today? We're going to get you on video, or are you? We don't have the video.
Here it comes.
Video up. There you go.
Should be coming. There we go.
Are you working today from the State Department?
No, I'm at home right now.
I like the casual Jerry look. That's good.
Yes.
How are you doing, my friend?
Flamingos.
Good.
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Great. Well, looking forward to your keynote.
Yeah, so I'm going to share my screen here. So I thought for the keynote, some I know have probably heard this or seen this presentation before, but I think it's really important is to understand, and I still have struggles with some folks that I talk to, and this has helped me when I do talk to industry as well, is level setting on what is zero trust. And there's a lot of vendors out there, of course, that definitely have their solutions of zero trust and things like that, and none of them are wrong, but there's just no silver bullet. So all of them are right. They do contribute to zero trust, but there's no total one tool or no silver bullet that I've seen as well. And we know historically in the government, we've had flat networks and things like that, and it's easy for an adversary to get through. We've always done this hard outer shell with the soft GUI center, but we've known that breaches in the past, some of them, the biggest breaches have come from insider threats as well. So in other words, we need to protect against what's important. So the great IT innovator Frederick the Great said, "He who defends everything defends nothing," and I think that really does apply, because, and this is Jerry's opinion, we kind of do this peanut butter spread approach. FISMA, while it's really good, FATARA scorecards, while it's really good to get focused on cybersecurity, that peanut butter spread approach to me is protect everything equally. And what my mindset is with zero trust is protect what's most important. I'll always say, let people have heard me say, protect the crown jewels over the cafeteria schedule, and focus the protections more closer towards those crown jewels rather than having this big outer shell with the soft GUI center. So basically, just like the X-Files, you trust no one, insider or outsider. You move the security closer. You do hear identity is the new perimeter. Well, that's not wrong, but identity isn't the only aspect of zero trust. And you're not meant to read this, however, but I wanted to control the conversation and understand the conversation, is put zero trust, my concept of what zero trust is, all on one page. This is meant to be printed on a plotter, of course, most assuredly. So definitely not meant to read, but you'll see in the subsequent slides that each box has its own. But in the center of it all is identity, data, identity, and endpoint. And I put data on top because at the end of the day, that's what I think we're really trying to focus on, is protecting the data. That is the Fort Knox of information that the bad guys want, that could be used maliciously. So what is the most important data in that? And then the other two pillars, identity and endpoint/applications, which facilitates the access for the person or the identity to the data. So basically, there's 5 principles, and if you've done the certification, I've done the certification. They line up with the 5 principles of that organization that does the certifications on Zero Trust. Is know your people and your devices, design systems assuming they're compromised, use dynamic access controls, constantly evaluate the risk, and the right sizing of protections, invest in defenses based on the classification of data. So very policy driven. To simplify it, these 3 pillars. So basically, I put this together to control the conversation, to educate what Zero Trust is. But when it comes down to it, categorization of data, I've actually found that some system owners that I've dealt with have struggled with the classification of data. But it's very important to understand what is the data, what's the important data, what's your high data, medium data, low data, and the high data is what I want to concentrate on, not try to protect everything equally because we have finite budgets and constraints of resources and things. So where do I really want to focus my attention towards? Of course, a lot of people talk about zero trust and a person accessing data. Well, data is not always static and it's not always a person that's accessing data, the system to system. So what does normal look like? Where's my data going? How is it being accessed from where? Things like that. So how can we baseline? Difficult, but definitely you want to try to baseline how your data flows and where it resides. Segmentation, we kind of like have the idea of for networks to put VLANs out and put a firewall in front of the VLANs, but we're actually talking about more getting more detailed segmentation from the systems that reside on, as well as even in the database doing data segmentation. So getting a little more granular on how we segment, not just have a classification of a whole system and then throw a firewall up on it because the highest data on that system is high. Well, there's other pieces to the system, does everything. So there's a little mindset change, a little culture change, but actually understanding how to truly segment the system as well as the data as well. Identity, of course, we did talk about that. Identity is really important. It's also a human. What kind of credentials are they using? What kind of device are they using? Is it a fully managed device? What kind of form factor is it? These are all factors in identifying data. So they all have different level of risk. Like a username and password has a higher risk than using a PIV card, for example. A human on site coming from a known network is probably a lower risk than somebody coming from a Starbucks network. A desktop computer, which I can put all these great agents on and all these security agents, I can't put those on a mobile device. So is there a different risk posture for those as well? There's definitely a different risk posture when you have a fully managed device versus a BYOD device and you're allowed to access data. So all of these kind of add up to a risk posture that says, all right, what do I want these people and these types of devices based on this level of risk to access what levels of data. So it's got to be very dynamic. Today we do authentication and access historically in a very linear fashion, kind of a one-time event. I kind of equate it to walking into the multiplex movie theater and I have my ticket and they take my ticket in the lobby but I can go into any movie at that point. So we want to put the ticket takers in front of the doors of the actual movies. And then we want to keep checking. Are you supposed to be here? Are you supposed to be here? So we want to do ongoing authorization, ongoing access. That's something I think that's being worked towards. I know DoD is looking at it, but you definitely need to check because factors can change. So it needs to be very dynamic so you can take actions. If you're trying to reach higher levels of data, do some kind of step-up event or additional challenges. Clients in a zero trust assesses the state of the device attempting to access the network. All devices aren't managed, so you can't put agents on everything, especially if you're allowing for BYOD. So you have to be able to assess it in some form or fashion, and so there's different level of risk. Monitoring, of course, is going to be very important in all the telemetry that you need because you have identity, authentication, access. You have conditional access policies from the cloud and all of those things. So bringing in that telemetry to make these decisions of this unstructured data is very important because that's going to drive your policies. And I call it a dynamic risk score, for example. So like I said, if I'm coming from a known network with a fully managed device, and I'm using a PIV card, my level of risk is going to be lower. So you'll probably get access to those things that you have access to oversimplify it. But however, something happens, conditional access policy gets triggered, like an impossible travel. You went from DC to LA in the last 5 minutes. All right, I need to take an action. I need to understand that. So I'm dynamically checking these things, and I'm going to lower your access maybe to read only, or and not let you download a print, or I'm going to shut you off the network. Or if you're a fully managed device, you have a 0-day patch, I may quarantine you, bring you back into compliance. And if, let's say, you are all right, you are logging in with a username and password with a BYOD device from Spiralbucks, my risk is probably going to be a lot higher. I may let you read certain things, but not let you access high data, for instance. But things can change as well, so it needs to be very dynamic. So that's where the monitoring comes in place, and being able to take those specific actions. A lot of people ask, where do I start? And so to me, I always say it takes a village, and it's not you just give this to the network guys. If you look at this chart and all the boxes that we went through, it's a program with many projects. They say, where do you start? I usually say, inventory what you're doing. You may be have an identity management program going on, or you may have done all right things. So, okay, did we meet all the concepts that I want to do for zero trust within that? What tools do I have? Inventory those. What could contribute and get me to zero trust, because you want to make the most of your investments. And then once you plug in the concepts and the things in these boxes that you've inventoried, all right, where are my gaps? The other thing is, and if you take the certification, there's a whole section on buy-in. Who do you need to buy in? Who are your champions? Who's your executive people that you need? What is your team made up of? Kind of putting together that playbook. So there's a lot around the business. It's not the technology. There's a lot of technology that can get you to zero trust that's out there, but it's usually the people and the processes. That's where a lot of the work has to be done. And so definitely understand who your buy-ins are, your executive folks that you need to support you. What I've done is we found a application that was modernizing, and we presented this actual presentation to them, got the buy-in of that system owner who owns very high level data, and we're starting a whole project around from his data to his application, how people access it, what type of devices, and the who, and what are the different types of the who's, administrators, power users, read-only type users. And we're working from the inside, I like to call it from the inside out, from the data back all the way through the facilitation of the access to the identity of the folks. And so that's been a good proof of concept that we've been working through, and a good way to do it. But you got to understand what the end goal is. So this is an architecture. This is a framework. This has concepts. It's not prescriptive whatsoever. There's a lot of tools out there, but this just put this together to help that conversation. So Tom, I know we have a great panel today, and I do not want to take up a lot of their time, because we got some really good people here today to talk about this subject, I think.
Yeah, no problem, Jerry. I do have one or two questions for you. Actually,
Sure.
somebody from the audience asked a good question, which kind of goes to please ask away, especially when we get into the panels. But
Yep.
we have one that is there a tendency to acquire too many tools, which increases complexity, which increases risk? It's like the old parable, the bear, the middle, the too small, the bed's too small, the bed too big. It's just right. How do you look at these tools? Because there's a lot of fantastic tools, but can you have too many? What's the right balance?
Yeah, I like the KISS principle. Keep it simple, and I won't add the last S. That's my teacher used to say. Keep it simple, stupid.
Yes.
to its students, but keep it simple. And that's why I say do an inventory. You've already made investments. You may be able to reuse, and you have familiarization with those things. You just might use them in a different way. But definitely keep it simple. You understand your environment best. So what is it that you can take advantage of? What works well with other things, and then once you understand those gaps, then you can, all right, what works well with what I have, and what's good in, because this is an integration. This is not a one tool fits all kind of thing. I have seen where a vendors come in and they like show me their set of tools, and they actually take my slide. They say, all right, here's your concepts. Here's how we can do that with this set of tools. And it's like maybe 1, 2, or 3 tools to address that concept. Then they go to the next slide. We don't do this. All right, there's my gap, kind of thing. So I kind of take that approach. I think another thing, and to go off on a tangent, is as we're doing the, with what we've just experienced with the pandemic and everything, and I forgot to mention this, is understanding what your risk tolerance is. What is your risk, and what's your sliding risk, and what is it that the telemetry that you need to be able to measure what your risk is and your tolerance. I like to say all of our agencies are a little bit special snowflakes, so we all have different risk tolerances. But reassess and make sure you understand what your risk tolerance is for some of the things, and that's why it's important to really categorize your data. So all right, do I really want them accessing that from a BYOD device? That's type of user or not, and have all those factors so you can have that dynamic risk and apply that methodology, which I think is going to be kind of the difficult part. A lot of people talk about the technical aspects of this, but the non-technical, I think, is just as daunting as the technical. I think the technical is actually easier.
Well, thanks, Jerry, for that keynote. That'll really kind of set us up for the day. And if you don't mind, just hang on. You're going to be on the next panel as well. I might have you back cleanup this time. But can the other panelists, do they mind jumping on? Jim, Stephen, Alma. Okay. And I don't think we have Alma yet. There he is. We're going to have to change your byline. Now, Alma, where is your, where's that drone in the back? I'm kind of used to seeing you with that drone in the back.
I can switch it up if you give me a minute.
Okay. Yeah, that's kind of where I kind of see you, but welcome. Okay. Are you at the office today?
Yeah, I am.
Great.
Well, thanks. But I'm more than a drone background,
I know you're just you're not a one-trick pony, huh?
That's right.
Great. Well, thanks for joining us. And we also have Jim Russo with GSA. How are you doing today, Jim?
Doing fine there, Tom.
Yeah, it's like deja vu all over again. I think when we started this webinar, you were on our first couple, I think, and it's been about a year, hasn't it?
Oh, since you started, yeah, but I've been on several since then. So
okay. Yeah, you're kind of, I think you got that got that thing going, that Saturday Night Live, who's been on the most. So I'm
an ATARC contributor, but I don't get paid.
Yeah, you're an ATARC contributor. Thank you so much. And we also have Stephen Hernandez, Director of Information Assurance and Chief Information Security Officer at the United States Department of Education. How are you doing today, Stephen?
Another day in paradise, my friend. Never.
Oh, I know. And I believe did you win Fed 100 this year?
I did, yeah. Fed 100.
Well, congratulations for that. I know Alma.
Been a great year.
Yeah, it's quite the year. And congratulations for that. And then last but not least, this guy won a Fed 100 too. Jim Richburg, Public Field Sector Field CISO and VP of Information Security. How are you doing today, Jim? Welcome back.
Oh, thanks, Tom. Good to see you again.
Good. And are you out of I forget what city do you live in?
I'm DC based as well, so
okay,
Northern Virginia.
Fantastic. Good stuff. Okay, well, maybe we'll start off with Alma. Addressing this topic. It's always an interesting one. You work in so many different areas of security. How do you kind of pull it all together? And zero trust seems to be an overlay topic because that's one of the maybe an easier way to do it. Although after seeing Jerry's slides, it doesn't look that easy to me, but looking forward to your comments, Alma.
How do you pull it all together for zero trust? I think that's obviously that it's a journey, right? And so you eat that elephant one bite at a time, just like the slide was showing. And one thing that he mentioned, I think is really interesting. So I remember in I would say 2010, all of a sudden, every technology that we used was a technology that should be used to hunt or prevent APT. And it's the exact same phenomenon happening right now with zero trust. All of a sudden, every vendor you touch is now a zero trust vendor. And they're almost not wrong because really zero trust, it really encompasses, I think, almost all of the fundamentals. It's just actually pulling them all together in a way that actually not only, it really, I guess, is dynamically enforces all of those wonderful security principles that we've had forever and makes them actually achievable to do, in practice instead of just in theory. So as far as what we're doing, again, really it starts with identity. And so that's going to be the big push for us. We've actually already started to migrate off of a lot of our legacy identity solutions. We're pushing into the cloud, so our identities are going to essentially be cloud first. That helps us in a number of different ways. From a legacy perspective, this fact that we've had to, if you have external partners, I think that's a real challenge initially. And we've all had to deal with usernames and passwords and things for all these disconnected systems and agencies. So having that cloud-based identity that can actually federate with other entities in a really, really seamless way, that's key. So we can actually have a way to assure not only that these individuals are who they say they are in a way that's better username and password, but then also starting to get into some of the device identities is really key too. Once we figure out those two things with sort of who you are and then be able to have the devices and understand those platforms as a part or component of that risk, then we can actually start using some sort of policy enforcement mechanisms. And we have a couple of different ways that we're looking at that. For on-prem, obviously, really hitting hard on not only the network access control plane to ensure that things that are on our network are actually authorized, but then taking the next step into the comply to connect so that they're actually, the risk on those devices are being managed. And then of course, as you get into the SDN, based on the profile of exactly what those are, what the posture is of those devices and the user and the user's authorizations and entitlements in those devices, we can then actually apply them to the right groups and only expose the portions of the network that actually need to have to do their job. On the external side, really the VPN replacement, especially going to some of these cloud services that do secure access service edge, which you've heard a lot about, I'm sure. That is probably the first real and meaningful way to start implementing some hard zero trust access control policies and really locking down your agency. Because right now, with the legacy of everything on-prem, where you're inside and you're trusted, it's almost a little bit more challenging. But if you start with the external VPN users that are already off-site, that already don't have access, you connect them in through that tunnel that's hopefully a cloud interface, and then you can only expose to them the various applications that they're actually explicitly authorized to expose instead of just dropping them on the flat network. That's just really, really an excellent way to take really a big chunk out of that elephant or apple or whatever you want to call it, and then to have that meaningful separation where now. If you do have an APT scenario, and if you can do that isolation, now it's no longer one host or one desktop or one laptop can see and access everything else in the environment. Now you're absolutely restricted where one laptop can't move laterally and go to everything else like that. They have an extremely limited view based on only the limited exposure that an attacker might have for that one view of that resource.
Great, fantastic, Alma. Let's go switch over to you, Stephen. Be good to hear about what's going on over at Education.
Yeah, so I loved all this conversation because so much of it captures what we have going on. And in particular for us right now as a department agency, we're really focused on getting the fundamentals correct and getting the fundamentals solidified. So for us, it's things like our data lake, making sure that we're maturing that, getting the raw data in from as many sources as possible, in some cases non-traditional sources as well. What does your training record look like? How does that match up with your suitability information? And then also moving forward with ICAM. Identity may or may not be the perimeter depending on who we have the conversation with, but it's undoubtedly a critical piece of the equation when we look at how well can we work in a zero trust environment. And if we can ID a service, a person, a machine, we're already behind the curve. Some of the other areas we were looking at a little more along the lines Alma was discussing is this control fabric, and where do we already have existing control fabric? As part of EIS, we're looking at what new software-defined WAN capabilities are we bringing onto the table? What type of new capabilities do we have with our perimeter defenses? And what type of capabilities do we have with our endpoints? And then kind of the overarching frosting for all of this is we have some early work headed into both AI, machine learning, automated machine learning, so that our adversaries are moving this fast. And I love the complexity question because yes, it is more complex, and yes, it can add avenues for mistakes and challenges, but our adversaries are embracing this level of complexity and leveraging it against us. We cannot afford to lose pace and lose track with the fact that that's what's being thrown at us from an offensive perspective. So lots of cool stuff in flight. Obviously, as you can see, lots of intersections with a lot of these points that were brought out prior.
Great, and it's going to be a natural transition. I have to go to Jim Russo because software-defined networks and EIS. That's like a softball right back to you, Jim.
Okay, Tom. Yeah, this whole panel is a softball from the standpoint of, from GSA working with these agencies. Stephen, Jerry, Alma, they already understand what it is they have to do. They understand all the pieces that they have to consider. They understand the planning they have to do up front, and just the whole structure of their network that has to change. A lot of times we get asked the other way, which is, GSA, when are you going to add a zero trust service to your contracts so we can just buy it? And then we don't have to think about the rest of that stuff. We just buy it. It's done.
How many CLINs is that?
Well, it's a lot of CLINs, as it turns out. There's no such thing as zero trust as a service yet. We're working on it. Yeah, it's definitely trying to bring folks back. And I think Jerry said it very well in the keynote. You really have to look at what you want to do as for an agency in terms of what is your policy, who are your people, who are your endpoints, or what are your endpoints? It's not always a person, right? What network management are you going to apply, and your identity management issues. So all of this comes together into a set of requirements that we then, can have some leverage conversations, good conversations with the industry community when they come in and they show a solution that says, oh, our solution does this, this, and this. And then, as Jerry said, you can map it to your requirements and find what matches and what doesn't. So, we've created, as you softball me, a number of new services on EIS to start agencies down that path. Of course, we've added software-defined wide area network service last summer. We've expanded the transport options on that with the addition of the broadband internet service. So now we have all three types of network transport services: the MPLS, direct internet access, and broadband internet. So they're now available through the contract. And we've done a lot of work, as you know, with CISA and the TIC3 initiative, and we've added a TIC service, which is also live on the contract. So a lot of the TIC guidance in terms of helping agencies plan, especially with the remote user situation, that's not going to go away anytime soon, if ever. A lot of the same principles that are laid out in those guidance documents that CISA has published really do apply here. The security patterns and determining, who are users, where are they going to, where are they, what do they need to access, what are their options to getting there, before you even get into figuring out what your areas of trust are. So there's a lot of planning, I guess, is the operative word here. And you definitely have to take a step back before you just go out searching for solutions.
Great. Thank you, Jim. And Jim Richburg, I'm just curious, like, I know you kind of cross between the government, and I know you know that really well, but you also go on the commercial. I'd love to hear your perspectives from not only across government, but where's commercial world? Where are they? Are they how far ahead are they? Are they that far ahead, or what's your
And
what, what do you
that's,
see?
that's what's interesting, Tom, because again, I remember working on this in government way before we called it zero trust. And we didn't do ourselves any favor by letting some people in the press give it that label, because it's not that people are not trustworthy. It comes down to the default thing. But, government set the pace on this. They defined the parameters. And then I feel for a number of years, the government lost the bubble because, again, I retired, I went to the private sector, and I realized they had developed a lot of capabilities. And my former colleagues in government felt like I was describing a rainbow unicorn. And here they had laid out what zero trust was, NIST had laid out how to build it, and yet they were skeptical that anybody could do it. And I really think that there is capability in industry. Fortinet's a big company, we're a global one. And you look at a company like ours, and it's really about secure connections between users, computing resources, and data. Location and platform agnostic. Well, that's a big part of the zero trust paradigm right there. I mean, I've already said, I don't care where you are relative to a network and whether it's wired or otherwise. So I think, Tom, what it takes to make this work, and I think where industry has gone, is it comes down to the instrumentation in the architecture and the processing power. You've got to have the attributes of zero trust are visibility and control. How do you have visibility if you don't have the totality, ideally, or at least the important parts of that attack surface instrumented so you can see what's going on? And then you have to have control. And it's not just a matter of saying, I've got that instrumentation. You have to have the back end policy, because those of us who are old enough remember the old public service announcement, speed kills. Well, so does latency. I mean, if you can do this, but you do it too slowly, it's going to get thrown away. It's not going to work. And I think what has been not widely appreciated by government, Stephen mentioned it, AI and ML, with the kind of processing you get out of the cloud, has now given industry the ability to say, I can characterize what's normal, and I can therefore know what's abnormal. And neural networks especially can help me see what's just 5 sigmas away from normal and what's malicious. As Jerry said in his keynote, part of where, I have a scorecard, I think, how are we doing on zero trust kind of across government? The easy stuff, everybody has segmentation, everybody has different classes of users. COVID certainly gave the validate the users, validate the device a good head of steam, multi-factor authentication. We're not so good at giving least privilege. We still overprivilege. If I need to read data, why do you let me write to it? And name of heaven, why do you let me delete the file? Where agencies tend to fall down is making this all transactional. To where Jerry started in his keynote, it's not just enough to have the ticket taker and even one outside the door. You want an usher to be able to tell when the patron in the seat suddenly starts behaving differently than a patron should. You need to do this in real time. You need to do this dynamically. And I don't think it's widely appreciated how parts of industry have got a fairly holistic set of capabilities. We come at it, Jim puts out an RFI or an RFP, and we come in with a one-off solution, and you just look at things through the stovepipes, and it's hard to step back and say they've actually got fairly comprehensive solutions.
Thank you, Jim. And Jerry, I got you back in cleanup this time. Anything you want to take from what everybody else said? And it would be nice to get an update too, also on the Zero Trust working group.
Oh yeah, I'll put in a plug for that for sure. But most definitely, I do want to go back, because I gave the short version today of the presentation. I didn't go into a lot of detail, but absolutely, Stephen and Jim are absolutely right. And I usually talk about this too, is understanding normal. And I think AI and machine learning are absolutely going to help with that, because you got to know when to pull the trigger on something. So understanding that normal, and I think machine learning and AI are definitely going to be great contributors to that. Absolutely. But to update, so yes, we do have a Zero Trust working group under ATARC. We are running it in 2 parallel paths right now. One is we have one for government only, where we actually started with this presentation and we're building off. We've done concepts around network. We've gone a little deeper into network data, assets. So we're taking it like somebody said, not trying to take on the whole elephant, but we're doing it in pieces. We're level setting and educating everybody in the government that's participating on what the definition is, what those things are. We'll have the use cases. And in parallel, what we're doing is we have a vendor working group of Zero Trust as well. So as we have the deliverables from our government working group, we are sharing those over to the vendor working group so that they can get started and start understanding what our thought process is, where we're going with things, and they can start figuring out, how their pieces of their proof of concepts that they'll ultimately deliver, like we did with TIC 3.0, where the vendors then came, built towards the use cases and the requirements, and showcased. So we're building towards that. So at some point when the government's ready and all the deliverables that they've done and we fed them to the government, we'll merge or fed them to the vendors, we'll merge the two groups, and we'll start the logistics of talking about doing actual proof of concepts of Zero Trust solutions. The group is huge. I think we get about 20 agencies represented in some form or fashion. I think we're getting up to about 20 different vendors / integrators. So it's not only just the tool owners or product owners, we also have the integrators participating too that take advantage of, others' products and tools and kind of pull the integration together. So really great collaboration. If anybody participated in TIC 3.0, it was a really collaborative group. Everybody working together towards a common goal. A lot of success there. So we're kind of taking that kind of playbook. We got a lot of lessons learned from that we're going to introduce as well over here. We will have a cutoff date though. What we decided as best practice is to have a cutoff date, not have people come in at the last minute and try to introduce themselves and us trying to catch them up when we're just about to get towards the end. So we haven't decided what that cutoff date is, but if you're interested in participating, definitely get in now. We're still letting folks in. Recognize yourself as either representing the government or a vendor, so we can get you in the right participation group as we merge, and we have people that can help you get caught up. And we put all of our artifacts on the Huddle site that Kirsten and Alyssa are very helpful in helping maintain that participation. So please, if you're interested in learning more, definitely join.
I think that's a good model, because you got to make the sausage. It's kind of hard to make the sausage when you're with everybody else. You got to kind of work all these things out. And I think that model worked. And I remember Alma, we did that in the digital government strategy. It was very, very effective. Great. Why don't we got some really good poll questions, and I think we'll go ahead and do those, and then we can start just jumping into questions and save your questions. But we're going to get this active imagination audience engaged here. How well do you think your organization understands Zero Trust? Okay, different levels of commitment here. So please answer pretty quick, and we'll see. And Jim came up with these questions, so if they're not any good, just give him a hard time, okay? No, they're pretty good. What results do we have? Let's see what we have. There we go. I think this has changed in the last year, I'll tell you that. I think things have been, this pandemic has had some consequences to it. Anybody particularly surprised by that? It seems pretty high to me, actually. Okay, great. Next question, which we're going to get a little more granular. What's the biggest challenge when implementing Zero Trust security within your organization? Okay, verifying users' identities, validating devices, limited privilege access, evaluating remote access, I'm unsure, or other. All right. Okay. Let's get back on that. Okay. You want to pop that up, Alyssa? Wow. Looks like depending on what part of the. Go ahead.
Is that peanut butter spread I was hearing so much about earlier? Right there?
Yeah.
A target-rich environment.
Yeah, I think that's the peanut butter spread. At least it got spread pretty well, it looks like. And then
You could have put all the above, Tom. I think that would have won.
I know.
Winner.
I know.
That's always the answer, though.
Yeah, this was pretty good.
Well,
Jim, I'm liking
again,
your
that's a target-rich environment right there too. Yeah, one of the ones I'd be curious of hearing what some of the other panelists think about is the privilege access one, right? So if I may,
Sure.
Tom, so post OPM breach, we had a big push in DHS to ensure that two-factor was being used for all the privilege accounts. We had actually big investments into the PAM, the Privilege Identity Management or Privilege Access Management solutions. A lot of those in the back end, where you go and you sort of check out an account and have to go through that system to get any sort of administrative work done. So we did a lot of basics with that. We did a pretty good job rolling that out. But recently we were trying to do some of the privileged administration on demand, where until the user actually needed to do some sort of a privilege function, they actually were not an administrator. And then you have a just-in-time automated process to get them to that level. And then as soon as they're done with that work, that goes away. And then obviously, as we work now more with both with robotic process automation, where maybe you have a process that does those actions instead of the user accounts doing those actions. And then of course, doing the privilege administration management on service accounts, sometimes that's like a long pole in the tent that doesn't get hit in that initial go around. So I'm curious what anybody else's experience has been in that space with improving that as a real key part of the zero trust implementations.
Yep. How about Jim? Go ahead.
I expected that was going to be the highest score on here, because that is agencies have figured out how to do it in a static fashion. I'm a sysadmin. I get these things, or maybe as Alma said, I give it to you just in time, but doing these transactionally to say, oh, I need it right now. I mean, I think agencies would probably give themselves an A if they said, hey, I can do it by day or by session if you're working remotely. I don't know anyone who's got the granularity to say task A within my session warrants this level of privilege, task B warrants that one, task C warrants this even lesser. I don't think most agencies, any agency that I'm aware of, has really set up to do that. So I think doing privilege management in a dynamic fashion is still the long pole in the tent.
Great. Stephen, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And frankly, when I was looking at the question, there was another big, well, it depends. For us, we're about 98% outsourced into various third parties, and getting parity of risk visibility and behavior in each of these different environments, especially when you're abstracted all the way up to say software as a service, that's really challenging. And we're going to have a lot of vendor collaboration and a lot of standardization in some cases to make sure that as we're consuming those type of services, we're able to get meaningful information that we can feed into our zero trust models.
Great. Jerry, you want to add anything?
No, there's a lot of good comments here, definitely. And going on the aspect of the the different user levels, one of the things is administrators, of course, they're very powerful, and they have a lot of rights, and they can overturn some things. So sometimes a little hard to control. That very challenging. Service accounts is another that you have to look out for. So a lot of people kind of leave those on the back burner sometimes because it's a little difficult. But definitely with administrators, things like time bounding, usually they're put in groups to delegate their access, and if they're not using it, they're still part of that group perpetually. So when they're not using it, remove them, vault them, do some kind of time bounding, that they get pulled out of that group at a certain time. And definitely, you got to truly do least privilege for them. Have a separation of duties. Stop giving the easy button. If you keep giving the easy button, you're just asking for problems down the road. We've seen that with the latest things, backdoors that coders put into things, and sometimes those easy buttons are what get you. So definitely least privilege, time bounding, and just-in-time administration is something that I definitely advocate for.
I just saw a company today that they're kind of a startup, but they look at all the algorithms, the security algorithms, and detect if they have any issues. The algorithm itself has any issues. Very interesting. I think this is just kind of getting started. Mr. Russo, anything you want to add? or move to the next question? Just let me
Well,
know.
I was just thinking, we took some heat, I think, early on with the tick guidance when, or maybe I didn't take it, but folks at CISA did, when they're talking about trust zones. And I think this conversation sort of maps pretty well to where, that conversation is gone with. The trust zone is really elastic, and, it can be shrunk down to, access to a particular piece of data or to a particular group of people. But and the additional time bounding of it, just adds another dimension. So just that elastic trust model versus, once you're in, you can see everything, is definitely come a long way from when we started. We got trust.
Well, we actually did have a question. I think it's pretty good. Are you confident in your strategy and tactics in addressing insider threat? Where do you think current teaching on insider threat are strong or weak? And I would imagine zero trust has got a big part of that. Hopefully will be helpful there. Alma, can I start with you?
Yeah, so I was just going to say, if you took the TIC 3.0 architecture, and the trust zones concept, that's not really zero trust, right? That's still kind of a legacy architecture when you think about that, because really you're talking about, again, trust no one and assume breach, right? That's sort of at one of the fundamental cores of zero trust. Doesn't really matter if they're coming from outside or if they're coming from inside, they all sort of have the same level of scrutiny. So I wonder what that would look like with TIC 3.0 if you push it down to that most granular level. But in regards to insider threat, it's the same concept, right? And it's the same thing with APT and insider threat. Is largely the same, because whether it's SolarWinds or coming in through phishing emails or whether it's an insider, ultimately you're looking at a set of user accounts or services or something else like that that has access on your network that is then usually going to be trying to do east-west, move laterally, gain new privileges, get into places where they shouldn't be. And so all of these things overlap and absolutely complement each other. And this really is where not only do you have to have all the roadblocks set up to ensure that your blast radius, whether it's a SolarWinds or Insider or whatever, is contained, but this is where I think the machine learning and the artificial intelligence and the other detection mechanisms that you have inside your enterprise are really key, so that you can identify when you have legitimate accounts and services that are acting in an anomalous way and doing things they've never done and that they shouldn't be able to do. Without that, obviously, you have things tightened down, to the ninth degree or whatever, then you should be able to identify things reaching outside of those bounds. But I think it gets more challenging. So you really need some of the machine learning to identify the unknowns that you maybe haven't seen previously.
Yeah. Stephen, you want to add anything?
I'll say, since we're talking about insider threats, some of the best modeling and information we have right now is actually coming from ODNI and the National Counterintelligence and Security Center. While they scope and target primarily around national security, a lot of the new frameworks that they've put out are equally applicable and derivative that you can take into standard cybersecurity operations, even on the unclassed side. So they've released an insider threat mitigation for U.S. critical infrastructure agencies, which is awesome. Even if you're not critical infrastructure, it's a great framework to look at. And they also have an insider threat program maturity framework that is excellent to use as a self-assessment, or bring in a good independent party and say, hey, use this framework, assess me, and tell me where I'm at. And then mapping up those outcomes with the capabilities that Zero Trust can provide, especially around behavior and anomaly detection, you have a great path forward there. You really do.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we seem like we always got to learn this stuff the hard way. Jim, you want to
Yeah,
You want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted just to foot stomp what Alma said in Stephen. It's user and behavioral analytics. It's being able to
Yeah.
do those quickly enough to see the anomalies. But, and I hate the term insider threat, even though I used to run that national program, it also works against insider risk. The same profiling can help show most damage does not happen from malicious insiders. It happens from people who are making mistakes, or we don't give them the right tools. They get creative to get the job done. And the same kind of computational capability can show you, hey, they're doing something that they shouldn't be doing, and that doesn't necessarily mean they're bad employees. In some cases, it means we have either a teaching problem or we have a technology problem.
Yeah, I think we had the Department of Energy person that has like all these nuclear secrets on their USB so they can get their work done. That was the easiest way at the time, you know. Jim, you want to add anything?
Well, I was just thinking about, how, I used to ask the question, how can artificial intelligence and machine learning help build user profiles? But, as I'm listening to the panel here, it's really morphed into, the computational side of it to, how do you, if you're doing a continuous monitoring, how do you monitor that network flow? How do you correlate those with user workflows? Maybe building trust scores on the fly or, continuously. So, I see a lot of places where that technology can plug in. I'm sure that the working group has seen demos of that, but, I'm just noting that that's really come a long way from when we first started talking about it.
Yeah. Jerry, back at you.
So our culture has been the hard outer shell and the soft gooey center, like the Tootsie Roll Pop. So whenever, one of the things that drives me nuts sometimes when people start talking and they talk about insider threat, sometimes I hear them start, going back to the outsider threat, and just not, that perimeter and keeping people out. And it's not really, that culture still, that mindset's still there. So truly insider threat. And I like what Jim said at the end too, is, it's not always a malicious person. It's just sometimes a mistake that's a threat. Somebody just does something, that they're not intended to do, but that was allowed somehow by the system or something. So all insider threats aren't necessarily malicious, but how do we protect against those things? So I think if you do follow zero trust truly, you're protecting against any and everything. Because you're focusing on what is you are trying to protect, how that facilitation access to it is facilitated, and then focusing on the different types of users and things like that. So doesn't matter if they're inside or outside. You're just categorizing those users, and you have your different level of risk that you're measuring depending on all those factors that we talked about.
Great. Well, let's go to our last poll question. And we love doing poll questions. They're fantastic. They're also like part of getting a CPE credit. So that's why we do it too. So we want to make sure you guys get your education and keep you engaged. But this is a really good question. In your eyes, does zero trust mean to federal requirements? It will require us to authenticate and verify across all resources. It will require us to adopt a least privilege model and enforce access control. It will require inspection and verification of everything. All the above, I do not know. And we'll leave it up for a few seconds. Apparently, I try to move too fast on these, so I've been scolded a few times. So we'll let everybody have a chance to contemplate. You don't have to make a snap massively decision within 3 seconds, but okay. All right. I think we got enough time there, Alyssa. All the above. There you go. There's your all the above. Wow. Okay. That's pretty self-explanatory. Okay, let's go into a couple questions. How are we going to what requirements are we going to need to draw up from the federal government around zero trust? What would be a good framework around that? Maybe start off with you, Alma. What do you think the role of the federal government? What do we need that we don't have right now? What would be helpful?
Yeah, I think more guidance definitely would be helpful to have a roadmap. So most folks who are following this saw the NSA put something out about a month ago. And it was actually pretty interesting because it wasn't necessarily a detailed guide that gave you every step. It was more of a, okay, here's a basic roadmap and here
Yeah.
are some basic phases that you want to get into on your way towards zero trust. And it broke it down into 4 things. So preparation, which is all your discovery and assessment, your basic, which is I'm cheating a little bit, I'm looking here. Let's see, implement fundamental integrate capabilities, intermediate, which is redefining capabilities, integration, and further refining capabilities, and advanced, which is deploying those advanced protections, controls with the analytics and the orchestration, everything else like that. So I think it's so all-encompassing and it's so overwhelming. And you look at some things like CDM. I don't think we've fully even come to terms with being able to exploit that data and use that really well. So we definitely need a crawl, walk, run strategy that gets us on the right path to where we can start to build on the maturity that we have. Because like you showed in that first poll, most agencies and most organizations are somewhere on that roadmap already. But it's going to be, ongoing process to continue to refine and improve and get better and implement more of those specific capabilities on the road towards actually having a mature and advanced capability that has all of the AI and everything else that we really want to have at the end day.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, the digital government strategy didn't prescribe everything on day one. It's like kind of was the government got together and kind of came up with their own guidance that they're going to follow, right? I think we need to have something like that. And maybe Jerry, with this working group, we can maybe work with CISA or, on that, because we need some guidance. Does anybody else have any, maybe Jim Richburg, do you have any other things that we think should be in some guidance that would be helpful to the government agencies to follow?
So I would look at it a little broader than that, Tom. I'd look at what are the government's levers to really drive change in this area. And it's the power of the purse. If you make it a contractual requirement, then we in industry are going to rise to do it. And the power of standards. The 800 series is a really powerful way to lay out this vision that industry and then potentially even a broader audience looks at to then build. And then I give DHS credit for being one of the agencies that said, let's figure out how to do this and let's do it in a repeatable fashion within our organization. So let's figure out what a good set of policies is, what a good set of controls is, and then not cookie cutter style, but at least give you the basis for saying we know how to implement this across the board. So, I think the government's got a lot of tools, and some of them will really drive. You set the demand signal, and we in industry will rise to it.
And Jim,
Great.
you're absolutely
Great,
right
Jim.
on that. It's pick it up the back end of that. If the requirements are out there, then as you're absolutely right. Industry has a target to shoot at. They'll build solutions, and the thing we've tried to do for other services to sort of guide agencies towards just wrapping their arms around that whole set of requirements and how do I lay it out in a structured fashion. I mean, we've done that for services such as SD-WAN and TIC. Our next step would be to do that for zero trust. And it doesn't necessarily map them to that magical zero trust as a service that I talked about earlier that doesn't exist, but it would guide them, at least for our contracts. Hey, you need to look at managed security services. You need to look at SD-WAN. You need to look at perhaps other types of managed network services and the SaaS tools you need to implement, across an entire network, cloud-based network. So, that type of guidance would then, I think, complement what you're talking about from just, hey, how do you establish the requirements? This would be, how do you map those to, getting the solutions that you're looking for?
Yeah, I don't know if I need to start another company in my life here, or not anytime in the near future. I got my hands full right now, but boy, zero trust is a service offering. Oh man, that seems like a pretty good one. Stephen, you want to add anything to this?
I think we've covered most of the waterfront on this. I think that we're going to continue to see vendors evolve, and I think one of the big opportunities for vendors is they've been moving in a rapid direction towards getting AI and AML and whatnot into their actual product silo or into their product ecosystem. I think the real advantageous position is going to be where they become interoperable with other vendors, and we can start moving that information around, or even better, get that information into a data lake for cross-enterprise type of analysis.
Yeah, and Jerry, I actually got one for you. It's kind of like one of the, we keep saying softball. This one's a good softball, but maybe don't speak about ATARC and our relationship specifically, but we'll discuss the role of public-private partnerships to drive results in like zero trust. Not ATARC specifically, but maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we are doing that with ATARC, but definitely, I mean, the way I put the presentation together, like I said before, I did that for my own selfish goals, but it's, worked for doing the education. But that's how I control the conversation and truly understand. These are my requirements. These are my needs. These are my concepts. How can you help me do that? So definitely been working together. Like I said, I've had them come in slide for slide, go through, here's how we do it. I definitely think there's some other opportunities for some partnerships. I know the CIO's Innovation Council has a working group on Zero Trust and are doing projects through the NCCOE, or the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. I actually I'm a co-chair on that working group as well. So that's another good thing. But to play off Stephen's analogy, I am going to jump off the pier into the water at the waterfront here. One thing I don't think that, and this is Jerry's going off on tangent opinion, is we're very compliance focused in the federal government, I believe. For instance, I can look at 853 and it says my system needs authentication. I can use username and password and say, all right, I'm compliant. I met that compliance. However, that's not effective. I think we need to focus more on effectiveness. How do we measure that effectiveness and let hopefully compliance will fall in place? I mean, the FISMA and the FATARA, like I mentioned before, they're all good and they all have the good intent, but I've seen the game, within the agency. Sometimes it's the Band-Aid approach, it's the tactical approach. It's all right, I met that compliance, but all right, was it effective? Red teaming and blue teaming, I think, is really important in testing, because like I said, not everybody's malicious. Sometimes there's the mistake people that just make the mistakes and the insider. So, that red teaming and that blue teaming can definitely help find the weaknesses. But I think we need to figure out how to measure effectiveness and not just compliance, because compliance does not equal effectiveness. And I think that's a very important conversation to have.
Yeah, there's always going to be the people that, the Redskin tickets at DHS. Yeah, I won some. Now they might actually, might be, Redskins are getting a little better. It might be time to bring that back out,
Well, if the Redskins existed, they're being sold oceanfront property in Arizona.
Forgot all about that. There's no more Redskins. Sorry about that. I'm old. That's my excuse. There's a question here about, is there zero trust funding in the current cyber funding or pipeline? Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know if it's really spelled out, but I did know the CDM program got $600 million. I can see it's a very big priority of the CDM program. Obviously, I can see zero trust is going to be getting a lot of funding from that and other places in the military. Does anybody else know anything I don't know?
I wouldn't be surprised to see some zero trust type projects coming out of the TMF, out of the Technology Modernization Fund. I think in a lot of agencies, as they look at response to solar winds, zero trust type technologies are definitely one of the things that people put on the roadmap to try to mitigate, impact of future events that are like that. So I think a lot of cyber investment will be come out of the TMF.
Just like
that's a very good point. Go
I'd
ahead.
like to follow on with that. Chris DeRusha, our new federal CISO, provided testimony in the last few days, a little bit about his vision, and a little bit about SolarWinds and some of these other episodes. And a couple things stands out. One, the fact that we are going to have to take some big leaps forward, moonshot type of activities. Small iterative steps will work in some places, but certainly not going to be the norm going forward. And part of that, almost spot on. There was lots of discussion around where are the security projects as part of these technology modernization fund requests. And so I think there's an expectation that departments are going to be expected to be putting forward some bold projects squarely in the cybersecurity space. There's discussions of, up to $1 billion up for grabs in this next technology modernization fund. And the expectation is we're going to see some big security projects in there as well.
I think you're right. We are working with the Technology Modernization Fund on an event in April that I think will be very illuminating. And, some of the payback, it's like kind of hard to get what's your payback on cybersecurity? It's like kind of hard to put a dollar figure on it. You protected the crown jewels, like that's pretty important, right?
Yeah, I
Anybody else?
think with some of
Go ahead.
those, they're actually looking at the possibility of not having to pay some of those investments back. At least that's what I've heard. I haven't been in the weeds on it, but I think that's acknowledged that you might not gain a direct, have money to reinvest after end of a cybersecurity project or something like that. In some cases, you might, if you can migrate off of legacy technologies or something. But a lot of times it is just investment without necessarily a capital on the other end.
I think you're right. I think that's going to be the spoiler alert of when we hear from them. They're going to loosen that up because they want to get that money out and they want to put it to work. And it was very restrictive before, so I think we're going to see some loosening up. And I agree with you on the cybersecurity. We got Technology Modernization Fund. That's $1 billion. We've got the CISA money. We also got money GSA got for government-wide types of things. TTS got money. So there's some new money out there that hopefully will be around, IT modernization. So let's see, are we on time? We're getting closer to the end than the beginning, folks, on this panel. In what ways has Zero Trust come to the forefront of enabling a shift to a teleworking workforce? And I just got off this Gartner thing. It's like, this is here to stay. Jim, you look like you were pretty animated there. I'm going to give you the floor. You jumped up in front of everybody. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I think it's here to stay. We had actually commissioned a survey even late last year that showed that this was private sector, but the bulk of of companies were planning to continue to let most of their employees, if they could work remotely, they were going to do it as much as 3/4 of the time. And when we did the initial pivot, a lot of organizations just sort of stopped at saying, we have multi-factor authentication, we have VPNs, but at that point, we're basically treating the employees as if they're back in the enterprise. And I think for this to gain legs going forward, you really have to take it to the next level and say, I do need to make this transactional, I need to make it by session, I need to make it by application. I should no longer have the gating function be, I validated the device, I validated the user, here's a secure connection back home, and now we just have segmentation to protect us. I think we're really going to have to say, I have to start living these attributes of Zero Trust for remote to become a secure practice going forward on an ongoing basis.
Great. How about you, Jerry? You guys you're on mute.
Yeah. Yeah, I have nothing much else to add, but definitely agree with Jim's comments. I think what we did with the pandemic and everything is we reassessed risk and what our new risk posture is by allowing for all this telework. So we had to make quick decisions. I think some of us have to revisit some of the things we did to be sure that we did them properly because a lot was done in a rush. But I think we definitely reassessed what risk we're willing to take. We were going down this path of, this mobile computing and having what we call the mobile diplomat at state, because we have spread throughout the world. And, it looked like a multi-year project. Well, No, we did it within a few months, actually, and we activated everybody for off-prem access. So I think we definitely understand and are reassessing what our risk tolerance is differently now from what we were before, because we were used to the normal. This works, let's keep it this way. But we were forced to react to this event, so we definitely have a different risk tolerance and perspective now.
I still remember the DoD came out with the remote computing memo they came out with. It took only about 2 weeks. That usually takes 2 years. That's a memo in the Department of Defense, at least 18 months. So I was like, whoa, this came out quick. Stephen, you want to add anything?
Not much else to say there. I think it's spot on, and I think in some cases this will also mean bringing in some data sets we haven't traditionally. Performance data sets, disciplinary data sets, sets that aren't traditionally found in your SIM. And I think that making sure we're working with our privacy folks as we go forward is going to be vitally important.
Yep. Great. Well, we just have a few minutes. I think it's about a year perspective. It's like before COVID, things moved a lot slower. It's been about a year since we've gone remote. It's like hard to believe. Our last event was in March last year. We haven't done a physical in-person event since. Where do you think we're going to be a year from now on Zero Trust? And maybe I'll start off with you, Jerry, since you are doing the working group.
Well, I hope for a year from now we'll have some proof of concepts to prove to prove out some of these solutions. I think there's going to be guidance. I think there's going to be more guidance. I think it's going to become clearer. I think some people are already taking action. I think there's the definition, and people will understand truly what it is that they need to be doing. I think that guidance will help. I really see some great strides. I think the solar winds, as folks mentioned here today, is really, and I think Stephen said it. We're gonna or somebody said it. I could be wrong who it was, but yeah, we're gonna have to take some big leaps and really knuckle down on some things, because you don't, the solar winds, who could have projected it? Nobody could have projected it, but it happened. What else is there that could potentially happen? So we're gonna have to take some big leaps forward. So I'm hoping we'll have some good proof of concepts through our working group.
Fantastic. I think that's a good way forward. How about you, Stephen?
So I think we're going to see a lot of focus on our high value assets. We're also going to see a focus on leveraging Zero Trust technologies for services and tools that may have enterprise-wide view and enterprise-wide ability to damage us or surveil us. I think many organizations in a year are going to have a good grasp on what they have for fundamentals, the pieces of Zero Trust. I think that's fair to say. And I think where they will be at is a cusp of, where do I start integrating and maturing these pieces that I have? I think that the message from the top of the administration is definitely acceleration in this space. And so I think that will definitely put a fire under most of the agencies and departments to really start, if they haven't already, doing a lot of market research. So if you're in the vendor space, I would expect a lot of calls about, hey, we're having a market research session. And I love Jerry's conversation about be ready to talk about this in various formats and flavors, whether it's the ATARC model, the NIST model, the ACT-IAC model. Know how your technologies map back, because the better you can tell that story. And I think Alma pointed out that this is a journey. You're not going to go buy Zero Trust as a solution, because people, process, technology, and environment, you have to have it all coming together to make it happen.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point there. Jim?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. I'm not sure which Jim you're asking.
Jim Russo. Yeah, we got 2 Jim R's. It makes it very, I can't even call you Jim R now. We got 2 Jim R's.
Well, Tom, I predict that your ATARC Zero Trust Working Group membership will blossom by at least a factor of 4 between now and next year. Because there's definitely a lot of interest in this area. As Steve just mentioned, there's going to be a push on from the administration to accelerate moving towards this. I know in our own agency, we've seen, some minor steps towards, not treating all traffic the same, implementing different ways to do policy enforcement depending on where you are, what you're accessing. And that's just going to, accelerate even further than just, hey, let's test this for a certain segment of the population. Let's do it for everybody. So yeah, I think all of those together will just, and we won't. I also predict we won't have zero trust as a service on EIS. That probably won't happen. But we'll have it mapped out a lot better so that agencies can put their requirements in and get solutions from the industry.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think and Jerry's shoulders are pretty broad, so he can kind of carry this thing. But we did a TIC 3.0. He's got some good help over there, Trevinia and some other folks, and
I'm sending him some good people from my team too.
And yes,
Justin Morgan and some other folks.
I think he's going to be on our next panel, so
Yeah.
that's a teaser for the next panel. But I think that we made a lot of progress with the TIC demonstration center. I think that zero trust is so much more complicated. That's why I think when we have the zero trust lab, which is basically going to take the requirements that Jerry and his team come up with, we really have the opportunity to really play, and really see how things work and interact. So we're really, really, really excited about that. Alma, I didn't want to leave you out on this question.
Yeah, so big predictions. I think in a year, we're going to have even less traffic going on the agency's legacy networks than we do today. I think we're going to see a continued migration of the traffic out to SaaSes and out to things where remote users are going direct into cloud services instead of traversing either the legacy TICs or the legacy enterprise environments. And I think we'll have more people in the office, but maybe 25% or something like that. I think we're seeing the beginning of a distributed government. I saw one OPM posting for a job. I think it was at Digital Services, where the location was negotiable. And we have proven we can work remotely, and I think we're going to see, especially agency IT operations, start to be able to hire people, wherever they are, across the country, instead of just being, in DC or Colorado or whatever else it is. And this is definitely the beginning of something that, very, very big. And we're never coming back to the same occupancy on-prem that we once had.
No, I think that's a great point. I'm glad you brought up the workforce transformation piece of it, because I think that's going to be a big, 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 big deal. It always was, but I think it's going to be even a bigger deal going forward. So, and Jim Richburg, I'm going to give you the last word, my friend.
Well, I actually give a talk, Tom, on the year of the hybrid. It's going to be hybrid workplace, hybrid work pattern. Unfortunately, hybrid threat activity as well. They're upping their game. They're going in different directions too. Necessity is the mother of invention. It seems like it was not much more than a year ago that I had former colleagues in government who were skeptical that we could do zero trust. And I think we went from lying in the crib to somewhere between crawl and walk right now. And a year from now, I think as long as we stick to the level of broad principles, we'll be farther along implementation. I think there'll be a lot of heterogeneity, which is good, because if you look at a solar wind, something that goes low and slow, when they have to rise in elevation to jump into the next ecosystem of capability. So I think it's a good news story. There's enough focus on it that I think we'll continue to build it out, and yet we're not dogmatically wedded to say it has to be solved with approach A and solution A.
Great. Well, that'll be the final word. Thank you again, Jerry, Stephen, Jim Russo, Jim Richburg, and Alma. That was a great panel. And thank you also for doubling up with the keynote, Jerry. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. And now we're going to go right into the next panel. We're fast paced. It's like quick cuts here. We're headed right into our next one. And I think we kind of teased this next panel up. When we're talking IT modernization, we didn't dwell on it, but a big part of IT modernization is going to be around the workforce and the security around the IT modernization. So I think when we're talking IT modernization, might as well be /security. So we'll go ahead and do some quick introductions here. Maybe start off with Adam Wood with Harvard. I haven't seen you in the dressed up getup. I'm like used to you with your Harvard shirt and the working groups, and you kind of dressed up well there, Adam.
Thanks, I appreciate it, Tom. Yeah, normally it's either the Harvard t-shirt or the hoodie.
Yeah. And Adam is a key contributor to the Department of Economics and Harvard University, and you've got like about 10 roles, so I couldn't fit them all on here. It would have been, but thank you for joining us today. And where are you working out of today?
Out of Baltimore today.
Out of Baltimore. Okay. Fantastic. Next we have with us Cameron Kalik, who is the Chief Information Security Officer, Office of the Secretary, United States Department of Health and Human Services. How are you doing today, Cameron?
I'm well. I was nice to see my former boss on your previous panel, Stephen Hernandez. I used to work for him a few years ago. So
that's funny. That's funny. I did not know that. And are you working out of the office today, or is this a home office?
No, this is the home office. Took down the Bob Ross poster in the back. Respect the chat here. So
I like
Bob
it.
Ross back there.
See, I'm old enough. I was like on Saturday morning, I'd like be walking by the TV and we'd have the Bob Ross show on PBS on. So,
There we go.
and also I'd be remiss that you also won a Fed 100. So congratulations on that.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate
Quite
it.
the honor. We also have with us today, Justin Morgan with GSA, and I got off in the wrong place here. And he is solutions architect at United States General Services Administration. And Justin, Jim Russo was singing your praises.
Oh,
How are you doing today?
doing well, sir, and good afternoon, everybody.
Yeah, where are you? On the other side of the world, the beach, and wow, it's. You're in the West Coast somewhere, right? Or
I have a
way
busy
west?
background, so I put up the shade image there. So,
Yeah, I like that. And last but not least, we have Jonathan Wen. I get the pronunciation right. I don't know if I did it. Jonathan Wen
No worries.
Dai. Is that how you say
That's
it? Or
fine. I don't even
Okay.
pronounce it. I don't like that part of the family, so I don't even pronounce their name.
How do you pronounce it officially?
Nguyen.
Nguyen Dai. Okay.
Yeah.
And he's vice president, global field CISO team at Fortinet.
That's right.
And where are you working out of today? It looks like you're out of your house. Where do you live?
I am. This is my home office, but my office is really the airport. On any normal year, I'm on the road 60-70% of the time. So.
Yeah, that's good. It's got to be a rough transition for you this time, huh? All those frequent flyer miles. I don't know. I don't have enough to be worth it, but hopefully they're not expiring on you. You need to go on.
No. United told me I hit 1 million miles, and that was 4 times to the moon and back. And so it's been great to get reacquainted with my family again.
Well, that's fantastic. Sometimes that works out. Sometimes that doesn't work out. I've got a few people that didn't work out so well, but I'm sure it's working out great with you.
Yeah.
But now let me move on before I get myself in any kind of trouble with it all. But how about we start off with you, Adam? Let us know a little. I'd love to hear your perspectives on this topic and a little bit about your work and all those hats you wear.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. And thanks, Tom. So I'm Adam from Harvard, specifically the Department of Economics. I work with the IC and other government organizations to better understand the challenges relative to modernizing solutions in a zero trust environment. So, we learn a lot about who we don't have in the room by our failures. And so to better square the complexity of the cyber attacks and solar winds and where zero trust frameworks are best deployed to secure IT architectures, we have to look at the magnitude of the penetration, which is one of the things that I do, not just for infrastructure, but also for the financial system. So that means a pretty deep dive into how we measure whether or not the fidelity of the data was manipulated or altered, and if so, to what extent. So obviously, that measurement could be confirmed by cyber forensics. It could be monitored by human intelligence, signal intelligence, or an AI feedback mechanism to ensure that the government is being supported and ultimately reinforced by trusted actors with no ties to foreign entities and those types of ancillary agendas. As we know, the evidence has already suggested that the cyber attacks have targeted the destabilization of critical infrastructure. the financial system, domestic discord, and the erosion of, really important things like international alliances. So, in brief, I'll wrap it up here. The process of how we modernize in a zero trust environment is vital. And that means, in part, supporting the security frameworks against foreign influence, while understanding how we can implement an integrated network in the aggregate post-COVID. So it means taking inventory on the consequences of error and learning from it.
Great. Thank you for that. And Cameron, a pretty easy year. I mean, what is going on at the Department of Health and Human Services? Your whole workforce goes remote, and you're like at the epicenter of this pandemic and the response. That's a year for the ages, I think, for you over there.
Yeah. So 2020 was, I have a lot of friends in the federal space, and honestly, I think myself and the folks at HHS that were part of the response, it was one of the craziest years, and it's still going. COVID's not over. We had to quickly stand up several systems to ensure that our leadership had we're making database decisions from the point of understanding the impact of the virus from the beginning to the point of spread, to the number of cases and death in various geographical locations throughout the country, to ensure that logistically we can get the PPE, the ventilators. We ensured we had enough on supply. We were able to get those out to the appropriate places, to ensure that all of our response systems had visibility to as much data as they needed. Also to work with all the state and jurisdictions throughout the country to ensure that they had enough information to get the data they needed. And also, there are quite a few different jurisdictional laws that are not applicable to the government. There are a lot of federal laws that we need to ensure that are applied in certain areas as well. So it was a hand in hand with the mission, with our legal folks, with our DOAs, working with our business units, and also working with the states and jurisdictions to ensure that they had the visibility to the data they needed. We had the visibility to the data we needed, while ensuring ensuring that we're meeting the Privacy Act and all the other regulations at the state level and the federal level. So pretty easy here to say. Anyway, so with all that said, there was quite a bit of learning last year. And one thing we recognized is in a state of a situation when there's a pandemic or there's an emergency, I've never seen, I've been working in cyber for quite some time. I worked at the OIG for about 11 years, and then transferred over the department for 2 years later. And I've never seen a situation where the data availability was so critical for the government to respond. And it was so critical that you could actually tie it to the number of lives saved, the number of individuals that could potentially die because you're not getting the right data to the right people's hand. If the agency is not able to get the ventilators or understand how many ventilators are needed, and not able to get the PPEs. I mean, this was in the beginning stages. And so we really went into it with our eyes open. It was, we didn't care where the data was, we wanted it. We were the Pac-Man of data hungry people. And we were like, I don't care where the data is, let's get it, let's figure out a way. And we had a Swiss Army knife of means of connecting that data into our process, whether it's actual CSV files that people were sending us via email, to FTP connections, to SFTP connections, while ensuring that we maintain the security of all the data, right? So it was a situation where we needed to dump all this data into this huge bucket, and then correlate this data with different events, and then at that point make that into a product. so that our business units can actually use that product, and while ensuring that the appropriate access level controls are in place, so that you are only giving access to the data that they needed and nothing more, and following the least privilege model. Anyway, I think we can get into this a little later. I feel like I'm digging in very deep right now.
It's fascinating, and we'll get into some questions. It just is.
Yeah.
Somebody's got to write a book about the things that you all had to go through. It's I know you're living it, still living it.
Well, Gardner did a case study, just a little plug there. Gardner did a case study on our project last year. So if you have a subscription, you can read about that.
All right, Alyssa, we got to dig that up somehow and maybe distribute that. That's a great idea. So we'll get Alyssa to do that, or get one of our team to dig that up. I think that's a great takeaway. And by the way, Jerry's slides, we've got a few questions around that. We're going to be sending those out too. We try to pack you with information and give you some takeaways as you leave. Next up, we'll go with Justin Morgan. Good to see you again, Justin. And you also had an interesting year. I know you supported, especially early, getting the laptops out, and there was a huge effort to get folks equipped. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic.
Sure, yeah, and as you mentioned, during their initial COVID response, there were several in ITC, pulled together to get mods done quickly. There were several done on networks, some of the legacy telecom commercial contracts. We actually helped HHS beef up their MTIP services, and did a quick review of that day to get that flipped around for them, scope review. And yeah, we are continuing to monitor and kind of push the transition from the legacy to the legacy telecommunications contracts to the EIS contract and primary there. And what we're trying to do, if we're talking about secure modernization, one of the things is kind of eliminating we have a lot of agencies out there that are looking to do a like for like transition just to kind of get it done. We're highly suggesting during all our scope reviews, adding comments, things like that, to make sure they look at least moving to, say, Ethernet instead of traditional TDM, the T1s, the DS3s, those older type of circuits, the OCs, whatever, and move to more of an Ethernet access. That enables you to move forward in other ways later. We're also highly promoting and suggesting the circuit switch voice, to modernize that to IP or a unified communications as a service, or to just take a look at what you're doing there. And the expansion of telework in particular has made the importance of having a good soft phone very important. And I know at GSA in particular, we've had that service, and we were lucky that when the pandemic hit, we were able to just kind of keep on keeping on voice services and all that. But we know agencies are currently looking to get that in place, and that's a step for that, is to modernize your unified communications, your voice. We're also having, and have been on a few of these, talking about software-defined WAN, where you can. Now, those looking at the like for like, or maybe looking at that as a different phase, but if there's agencies out there that are, say, changing their incumbent, it's almost, I don't want to say easier because it's not, but it makes sense to take a look at that more for some of those branch locations and even some of those other smaller offices that you could take advantage of that. And I know HHS OIG in particular has made a lot of stride in that area with SD-WAN. But I would say those are the big things we're saying. And of course, security is it's included with all of this. Of course, it has to be. We're also saying for future proofing of things for like TIC 3.0 solutions and a move away from MTIPs and traditional TIC, is to make sure that you put managed network services and managed security services on your solicitation and award that to your provider.
Yeah.
That'll allow you to evolve your services as you move forward to some of these as a service or TIC 3.0 or SD-WAN or any of that. So of course, security is all part of this, but if we're talking about modernization, that's been our big push at GSA, is watching this telecommunications transition between the legacy and the new EIS contract. So we'll get into more of that, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think you're right about the IT modernization. I think well, we'll talk more about it, but I know you guys are working on a few things. Jonathan, I'd love to get your perspective. You're all over the world and you're not getting your frequent flyer miles as much as you used to, but you see what these organizations around the world, not just the federal government, what are the big trends you see? I know you follow.
Sure. Yep. Yeah. So prior to coming to Fortinet, I spent about 16 years at Verizon, where I ran their MSS solutions for public sector, everything from SLED to the Five Eyes community, and then I ran the Fortune 500 solutions as well. And so the last year and the needs for modernization have exacerbated a lot of those systemic issues that I saw across those 16 years. The lack of integrated technologies, the lack of thinking about networking and security and the compute. And what we're seeing now in modernization are a couple of major trends. And they start off with the need over the last 12 months to create a software-defined digital enterprise, if you will. The need to move to software-defined features and functions, a focus on outcomes and experiences, and to find new and seamless and more secure ways for the connected citizen and the consumer to interact with government organizations and private sector brands. And so the major trends are as follows. As you move towards that software-defined enterprise, compute migrates from legacy data centers to a much more hybrid environment and a multi-cloud environment. That distributed computing, as reflected in both remote working, edge computing, hybrid cloud, also drives SD-WAN. And SD-WAN is driving the need for SASE, secured access service edges, because the network and security always follows the compute. So as we think about how do we modernize IT, we can't think about those three elements just disaggregate as separate operating silos. That's one of the main reasons why we had systemic issues and gaps in visibility control in the past. So moving forward, when you think about how to modernize the IT environment, it starts off with cloud and multi-cloud, and then that drives the need to have networking and access directly across the internet to those cloud resources as manifested in SD-WAN. And then as you have more and more network edges appear across the enterprise, you need to secure that with some form of SASE-based approach. So those themes, and of course, zero trust. Ironically, zero trust gained more traction initially in the public sector than it ever did in private sector. So after those really big breaches and those notorious breaches in the mid-2000s, right, you saw the congressional investigations, you saw the mandates and suggestions to implement zero trust. It was only after that, some large breaches in financial services and a pandemic, that the private sector really latched on and gained traction. So moving forward, I think zero trust is going to be foundational to any security strategy. SD-WAN is going to be foundational to any enterprise networking strategy. And likewise for the compute, it'll increasingly be hybrid with a mixture of cloud, legacy data centers, and increasingly the edge compute.
Great. And Justin, it's great to have an old networks guy on this too. So it's fantastic.
I'm sure Justin and I crossed paths on a couple of contracts. He dropped some words that I hadn't heard in a while, but yeah, I remember them pretty well. M-tips, things like that.
I installed a few government networks back in the day. I'm an old network guy myself.
Yeah.
Cameron, I'm going to start off the next question with you, but it's really, especially for HHS, not only did you have to modernize some systems, you know, how do you balance that with security when you're doing this on the fly? So maybe start off with you. You can elaborate a little bit on that, but that'd be my first question.
Yeah. So, you know, one thing we recognize is that, you know, our traditional model of, you know, you get adjudicated, then you get access to data so you can do your work. And, you know, you have the entire onboarding process of a human through our system that goes through identity proofing, background check, et cetera. And then you gain access to a system, data, so you can actually do the work. We didn't have the luxury of that time. So when we got into the situation, we recognized that we not only had internal partners, but we had external partners. We had education institutes, we have state, local, territorial, tribal users that needed access to our system. We had other federal agencies. We had the White House Task Force, and you know, we clearly recognized that we needed some means of modernized identity access management system in place. And you know, we recognized that we were on a federal system. We needed to ensure that it was FedRAMP. So we selected a product and used modernized technology in terms of SAML integration or OpenID connected, depending on the system that we're connecting to, and started building out that entire process. I think it was a matter of like 2 weeks to where we stood that up, started connecting it, and identified the resources groups and started managing the access to the level of data. Initially, we had very large buckets with respect to who we granted access to. One thing we recognized that this really, in order for this to be successful, we really needed to distribute the approval over to the data owners and data stewards. They're intimately familiar with the data, and they would be able to recognize the data and see if it meets their mission and be able to integrate that into the approval process. That was really critical because as an engineer, you guys know, you're working in IT, system engineer, they're not going to know if this individual really needs this particular data and whether they get access to it. They're just IT people and they know how to plug in buttons and grant access. They know how to orchestrate and manage the tool. However, in terms of actually granting access and understanding the meaning of the data and the usefulness of the data and the sensitivity of the data, that had to go back to the data stewards. So getting that included and integrated into the process, in addition to ensuring that our system was built to comply and integrate, automate the DUA, the DUAs for the data sets as well. So like I said, initially we started with bigger buckets in terms of where to put people in groups, and then tie that back to the front of the data to ensure that only the individuals that needed access to data were gaining access to the data and nothing else. And then later, as more products started developing out of our platform that we're building on HHS Protect, we realized we needed to get a little more granular in terms of the groups, and because there were a lot more projects, a lot more use cases from the point of view of therapeutics, to the point of view of volunteers for vaccine trial efforts, to the point of supply chain control tower, in terms of understanding where our weaknesses may be with respect to supply, from raw material manufacturing, distribution, to the actual healthcare administration site, understanding that entire process and seeing where those fit in, and ensuring that all along only the individuals have access to the data to which they can get, they're allowed. And so we had to get really creative in terms of how we define that. And going back to the data stewards, I don't think this could have been done without the tight integration with the program, with the data stewards, individuals that are more intimately familiar with the data, and they were able to make the decisions fairly quick. And we can grant access and then revoke access in situations where we needed to. So strong identity management was, I think, one of the critical pillars for this success. Also, the integration with other data sets and getting that view of the data, understanding potential mosaic effects of the data. Essentially, if we define the data set to be non-identifiable, however, you take that and put into the public sphere, understanding that the data that we plan to publish could potentially lead to a mosaic effect, meaning you take that data and tie it to other open data sets, and that could potentially identify someone. So that was another risk we identified. So
you're doing this on the fly. It's like you got to do it quick.
So,
it's like you have to go ahead.
Exactly. So no, you're absolutely right. We had to do it on the fly. We had to do it very quick. And we also recognize the power of data, right? Being able to then take that data and geographically pinpoint this data. And I learned quite a few things. One thing is, you think those agreements that you're agreeing to on your phone when you download and install apps, you would not believe the companies that turn that into a business, multi-million-dollar business, and just based on the data that you're constantly beaconing out from your device, over to their systems, and they're taking that and turning it into a service and selling it back to customers like the U.S. government, like other organizations. And that's the other thing. The dangers of potentially connecting that data to actual other data. And that's where we were like, wow, that is some scary and dangerous stuff. And you can't, like, honestly, anybody can go out and purchase this data. And it's it kind of takes you aback, and it makes you wonder, when you're agreeing to something on your device, like where's this data actually going? What are you providing? And could this data be connected to another data point to potentially identify you in whatever it is that you may be involved with? So it's absolutely frightening, kind of cool from the data geek perspective, but it's pretty crazy.
Yeah. I mean, you brought up a lot of good points there. And Adam, we're looking at a modernization security. I kind of look at the people. I know that's where you spend a lot of your time. Like, I got to bring my workforce there. I mean, I got the technology, new tools, but there's always new processes, and people are displaced, and I got, how do you deal with the workforce issues when you're trying to do IT modernization?
Well, so you've got an abundance of macro changes, and relative to telework, and then, as was just discussed, the considerations for what's tantamount to differential privacy, and that's kind of falling short, and I really don't have to go into too much of it, but most existing privacy laws and regulations focus on personally identifiable data, and they rely on legal concepts that have less relevance on privacy and more about how can we exploit, the user's data. And so there really aren't any guidelines as far as that's concerned right now on a national or even an international level. So that makes zero trust even more important as we talk about the workforce. I mean, zero trust draws on technologies, as we've discussed, multi-factor authentication, analytics, encryption, scoring, all the systems permissions. And I think that, again, if I'll get to the workforce in just a second, but if we take a look at why zero trust is calling upon a more codified set of governance policies, such as, giving the workforce the least amount of access they need to accomplish a specific task, that's where your process is imperative, because when you start to assume that you assume malicious intent and compromise infrastructure from the outset, that's going to determine how you're designing and developing and then ultimately deploying those advanced maturity solutions. So when I really think about the more information that departments and agencies, and there's the bell for center, the department and agencies utilize when you're talking about strengthening information and communications infrastructure, being essential to national security, for economic prosperity, taking into account the extent to which the legacy systems interoperability is ultimately going to either lower the barrier to entry for specific workers, whether they were displaced at the outset of the pandemic, whether it's because of specific skill sets that have basically outstripped the extent to which blue collar workers can re-enter the labor market relative to white collar workers, historically underserved populations, and all of those things. You really have to think about how flexible the parameters that are going to be established are, and tie that to labor economics. So, we have to think about, the type of dollars that are being spent now on workforce transformation. We got through the $1.9 trillion package. We're now looking at a $3 trillion jobs package, which it's pretty ambitious, but if we're looking at infrastructure and how that plays, not just for a public health workforce, And the establishment of that, which if you say establish in legislation, that implies absence. So doing that, but really specific to infrastructure, both physical as well as cyber. These types of packages could generate substantial economic returns over the next decade if employed appropriately with those codified requirements as set forth in the zero trust parameters by the NSA.
Great. Thank you for that, Adam. And I'm very sensitive to workforce issues. I'm originally from Western Pennsylvania. I grew up in a steel mill town, and there was not a transition plan there, believe me, when the steel mill closed down. Justin, another hard area besides workforce is acquisition. How do I buy me some IT modernization and throw some security in there, right? IT modernization is a service, to go off the last panel.
Yeah, no, that's definitely something that we're working on within our group at GSA and ITC in particular. As trying to inform, we have the Cloud Information Center for those looking to move to cloud, looking for templates for solicitations and just general pricings, comparisons, things like that. So cic.gsa.gov, check that out. But it's a good lead in there. And of course, on the program that I primarily support, the EIS program, Enterprise Infrastructure Solutions, for those that don't know. We every time are reviewing a solicitation, because there's a step in there that GSA has to review for technical scope, and then there's a contractor review to make sure they're in compliant with the contract. Our team is always adding those things in there, like I mentioned earlier, about please be open to alternative solutions, or please ensure you include managed network and security services, and those kinds of things, because it'll allow them to evolve their service, because EIS ends in 2032, in July 2032. Well, if you award the contract to someone, it makes sense to be able to evolve that over time without having to do another fair opportunity. So please make sure you write your solicitations in such a way that you're able to evolve your service. And based on conversations with some of our providers, I would say they're more able to evolve in industry their service with a current trusted client, because they've been there, they know their operations and all that. And when it gets around to refresh time, they can say, hey, what do you think about this? And they kind of go with it. On the government, that's a new fair opportunity. You have to go back out, put your requirements on the street, have equal eyes at it, take a look. And I guess what we're trying, and I'm not saying that goes away, but I'm saying that awarding these services allows that evolution to more modernization. And if you make sure you have the managed security services on top of it, it allows you to evolve your security services with your trusted provider. They already are basically taking care of your infrastructure. They're already potentially seeing everything that goes across it. Why not go ahead and put that layer in as well and move that to more of like a SOC as a service or something like that. And I'm being generic talking about operations. Another thing Adam said was very important too, which was about hosted legacy applications and plans for that and how that fits in like zero trust. Well, I know in the TIC 3.0 guidance, and this was kind of discussed a little bit in the last panel, but about the trust zones and what basically, and I know that's not maybe the most popular topic, but I think you still have to group your applications and your data access and things like that, especially if you're doing it central policy orchestration. You have to be able to apply at least some central policy to those accessing those things. And whether that means they have to come in through the perimeter of a legacy network to then do that, or whether they are allowed to just go direct, or just what level of access they have, and then layering in the extra authentication steps. I mean, some of those applications may or may not be able to even accept any of that. So it's you have to control that at your endpoint, at your borders still. And I know that's old school. We're talking about legacy apps here. So it's all that needs to be factored in. And one of the things we're also seeing is agencies are trying to modernize, but that means they have to run parallel environments. And a lot of times the funding just isn't there. So they'll start down a path and then they get the bill and they're like, whoa, I need to, pause or rethink this or whatever. So we ran into that with a couple conversations with agencies, and
Interesting.
then have to talk to providers and agencies and try to figure out how to move forward. But that's a real challenge, is the budgeting aspect and making sure you can afford a parallel environment to then transition or modernize to it. Okay.
Yep. Cameron wants to add a little bit to that, and you might have some experience there.
No, I was just going to dig into a little bit about the zero trust. Every time I hear about zero trust, and I hear a lot of people talking about it, it's really a hybrid zero trust in the government we're working on. If you really think about it, if we're talking zones and et cetera, it's not really zero trust, right? The supply chain piece still needs to be matured. I think in the private sector, I've gone to Google, I've met with them and talked to them how they did zero trust. They actually built and developed their own chip, right? The Titan chip that actually takes your biometrics, has the whole TPM module built in place for the hardware device. So now you're fully trusting the device. You're embedding your human characteristics, which is your fingerprint or your retina scan, into that to create that trust of that certificate. And at that point, the confidence and the fidelity of that certificate is so high that it doesn't matter what network you're on, right? In simplicity, that's really the path of zero trust. However, I think, in the government, we're trying to, I guess in the spirit of zero trust, doing a lot of that. But I really think DHS, they're working on the initiative for supply chain. I think the government as a whole needs to get together and maybe somebody authoritatively say, hey, GSA, you're going to be in this area of the supply chain risk, and HHS, you're going to be responsible for this area. That somebody has to do that orchestration, or organizations need to volunteer, and then if we can start working on the supply chain and build that out, I think that's going to lead us to the path. I still find that as a huge risk, a huge weakness. We saw that with, as everyone knows, the SolarWinds piece, but there are so many other areas that need to be resolved on that front, and the governance is needed. And if once that's done, I think that's going to probably help plug in a major gap that I see in government that we have right now.
Great. Jonathan, you could pipe into Cameron's comments, or you can go back to the original question. You look teed up there.
Makes a great point, right? So zero trust is important, but it doesn't address unpatched vulnerabilities, right? It doesn't address DDoS attacks. It doesn't address misconfigured devices that go undetected. Zero trust is a great way of limiting and controlling and ensuring, least privileged access. But there are, as Cameron alluded to, dozens of vulnerabilities that could be exploited. There are dozens of threat vectors that need to be addressed, supply chain being one. So I think that when we think about modernizing an IT environment, we need to think about, as Justin alluded to, networking and security in a converged environment. So they shouldn't be separated, because the outcomes and experiences depend on all three working together. And events that occur in the network space need to be viewed by the security team and vice versa, right? So you can't just have the SD-WAN component managed by the network team, and then the next generation firewall by the firewall and the security team. The two don't talk. And today, irrespective of where we are technologically, organizationally, culturally, we're not ready yet for that level of collaboration that's really needed, right? So modernization, in addition to tools and funding, has to address organizational charts, cultures as well, and that's going to take some time. But I would say one of the lessons I've had over 25 years is this: 80% of all attacks that lead to major disruptions and data breaches could be mitigated through simple to intermediate controls. Those are all clearly outlined. And if you take the approach networking and security holistically, and ensure that those basics and security hygiene are met, the SANS 20, things like that, the NIST CSF, you go a long way towards setting the foundation, if you will, to modernize and to get things right from the outset.
Yep. And the other thing I want to add is, the government was kind of called flat-footed with our lack of diversity in terms of tools. I mean, I think 95% of the government is using Office 365, and with the SolarWinds piece, it impacted greatly. Like in terms of COOP you see, I don't know. You know what? Like my days in OIGs make me put on this auditor hat. I'm like, why didn't you diversify your email? Why didn't you have like a backup, like a G Suite setup in case you get compromised? Where was your alternate means of communication? And so like that's the area I think it's going to be reviewed, especially by the IG community in the government for all their respective agencies, to provide those types of recommendations. I think that's going to be critical for us going forward.
Yeah. I think what Justin said about the money part, that's a big deal, right? Obviously. Go ahead, Jonathan.
No, I was just mentioning the comment. It reminds me of the time when I was in government years ago, when we did a disaster recovery test. And we all went down to the bunker, and then we got to the bunker and opened up the binders, and the binder said, dial this number. And we pulled out the phone. It was a rotary phone. There was no way for that rotary phone to interface with that plan. So exactly what you said.
I kid you not. Before I had AT I was at GSA. I kid you not. We had a site in, I forgot what part of West Virginia, but that was our COOP site. And it was at a bank. And I went out there and built that thing up. I remember shipping the sands or putting them on a van at the PBS building in Northwest. Justin knows what I'm talking about. And I think it was Martinsburg, West Virginia, but that was our COOP site. And it was because it was in the proximity of DC. It was just far enough to become the COOP site. But
that's right. It's outside the blast radius.
Yeah, outside the blast radius, exactly.
You're bringing me back memories. It's like almost impossible to order a POTS line anymore, a plain old telephone service. Yeah. There's this company up in the Northeast, Granite, and the guy's like a billionaire. He owns the part owner of the Celtics now because all he did was POTS lines for the longest time. Guy made a fortune off of it because nobody else would do it. Great. Well, let's we got to hit the polls real quick. Alyssa, she's let me know that I don't want to get on the wrong side of the accreditation program that we have here at ATARC, so you guys can get your credits. I don't want to get in trouble. When making the switch to remote work, what was the biggest obstacle your agency had to overcome? Heightened security, cybersecurity risk, outdated legacy technology, identity and access management, collaboration, productivity, other. Good question here. Let's everybody have a chance to look at it. I'll try not to be too fast. Let's see what happened. Let's see what we get. Can you pull it up, Alyssa? Pretty interesting. Yeah. I'll tell you what, I've done a few of these webinars. That collaboration piece in the beginning was, they didn't have the bandwidth to do it. I'm going to start off with you, Justin, because you were right in the middle of it, working across agencies.
Yeah, I would say the collaboration was definitely one of them, because you had people that were used to being in the room staring at each other, and now they can't do that. And there's a lot of leaders that formed their whole, I guess, game around that, and now they can't do it. So I know there's definitely some in this federal space that, sort of believed in telework, and then all of a sudden it's forced upon them full time. So I do think the collaboration, at least for me and what we've seen, was one of those things. Again, this gets back at our, trying to make sure folks modernize, move to unified communication, something like that, to make these things more possible, because then it's just part of the package. But
Adam, I see you nod your head. What this collaboration piece? We're back to the human factors, workforce.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what we do. I mean, it's not just, working closely with the IC and across government agencies. We're working with industry and academia as well, and establishing, continuity of communications and coordinating those communications, across, a multifaceted and interdisciplinary team. That's tough. And, I think one of the misconceptions about text messages and emails is that, just because you send one doesn't mean it directly goes into the person's brain that you're sending it to. So, you do have a bit of a lag in comms sometimes, but, as a matter of national security, these are apolitical issues. They'll be interested. A lot of people that we work with, yourself included, you know, it should be of interest to anyone who wants to reduce, you know, the vulnerability that we've seen over the course of the past year with everything we've discussed. And so collaboration is key.
Jonathan, you guys are an international organization. You deal with international organizations as well. How did this change with you all? I mean, you got product teams. You're like involved with a lot of things over there, right? How did the dynamic go internally and then externally with all your customers?
You know, it went surprisingly well. I mean, the ability to leverage remote working and collaboration technologies to deliver business actually worked well. And the reason why it worked well was because the quality of the experience was supported by SD-WAN, and security was integrated with that. I had a CIO tell me his organization, a large healthcare company, North America, went to 100% remote desktop support, right? For thousands and thousands of patients and users and other stakeholders. They did it in 6 weeks, migrated everything to remote, their call center operations, that is, using SD-WAN and VoIP, and had 0 complaints. I worked in a call center, and to get 0 complaints from people working in a call center is just amazing. To get 0 complaints from patients who are trying to access healthcare information in the middle of a pandemic via SD-WAN and VoIP and video conferencing to do everything from clinical and non-clinical functions is just extraordinary as well. So I think we were well served by the technology, and it portends what's coming next is that there will be more connected solutions, more IoT, more IIoT, more things connected on the edge. And so you're gonna have much more distributed computing. 5G accelerates everything near real time, right? Augmented reality, very rich experience, high fidelity. Those are things that lead to 2 key words moving next: predictive and proactive. Connected citizens and consumers will expect services to be accelerated, intervals to be shortened, experiences to be better, and that they expect government to be able to be more predictive and proactive in the way it supports the public. Like it or not, that genie's way out of the box at this point, and it's never going back in. We're all millennial. Even though I'm 54 now, I have millennial expectations going forward.
That's, you know, we're not going to be wheeling our 96-year-old grandmother into the Social Security Administration office downtown anymore. I don't think we're going to be doing that. I don't think we're going to expect something different. Cameron, you want to add anything to Jonathan's comments? I forgot what the original question is, so we're just going to go.
Yeah, it's about collaboration. So
yes.
One thing I experienced is I think I got the potpourri of collaboration here. It's like there were so many different tools. I think I've seen them all over the last year in terms of video conferencing tools, Skype, Zoom, WebEx, Teams. I really wish there was a common standard, common platform across all of them that they all conform to and everybody worked with. So we didn't have that conflict when trying to connect, because there's sometimes one particular platform doesn't work in a one particular. We were literally, when we set up meetings with our external agencies, we're like, oh, Teams doesn't work with this agency. We got to make sure we do Zoom with them. Like,
you gotta have the backup. You were talking before. You got to have backup, right?
Yeah, you got to have backup. You got to have that diversity, right? So that's one thing. And then the other thing I do miss is the immediate human feedback. When you're meeting with someone in person and you say something, I'm a firm believer in agile and iterative improvements or responses and getting that loop back. And it's very tough to gauge that loop back. Even if we have video, right? Someone could be in the middle of doing something else or distracted or working on a document while you're talking to them, and you don't get that feedback, and you don't necessarily have their undivided attention. And so that's kind of missing, because I think humans constantly adjust and collaborate in terms of their next move based on their previous feedback. And so I found that to be kind of lacking, and had to adjust in terms of video life on that, in terms of video conferencing life.
Yeah,
with that piece. But
got one more poll. Let's go to the last one. We have time for one more. I would rather do poll question 3 because I think it's pretty. Not that poll question 2 is bad, but if I'm going to do one, I'm going to pick 3. Can we do that? What's the biggest challenge your agency faced while transitioning to securely modernize? thought this was a good one. I don't know if my team came up with this or you guys, but I liked it. So let's see what we come up with here. If we can show those data points. All right, Alyssa, what do we got? Interesting. I think what some of the things you were saying just a minute ago, Cameron, about just remote work, and it's like, I just saw something up today. Gartner had something about how people are kind of pining to get back in the office a little bit. They want to see people. They want to collaborate.
Yeah, people with kids like myself would love to get back into the office. No, I love my kids though.
That's great. Okay, well, we just have, boy, this panel went by quick. I think we have time for like kind of final comments. Maybe on this IT modernization, where are we going to be next year when we revisit this topic and we go to this panel, and maybe we'll start off with you, Cameron.
I think next year, honestly, I think the hot issue is still going to be supply chain risk. I wish the wheels are moving faster to stand up a program across government, but unfortunately, I feel like we're unless something happens, unless we get a lot of funding in that particular area, I feel like we're still going to be there. I do see some hope in terms of moving things up the stack. I can't imagine agencies continuing to build custom systems and custom apps. I think low code, no code is probably going to be the way of the future as well. And there's some really unique companies out there looking at purely no code development, and that's really interesting of how they're doing that. It's all going to depend on how compliant and the adaption rate on that, but I think that's going to be in terms of turning systems around quickly and applying that to the business and being able to do that in such a fast pace that business can see the value and then that'll move the agencies forward. So I see, and here again, everything's going back up to moving things up the stack and already approved systems like FedRAMP, like common control providers, so that we're not assessing and redoing assessments on many other systems. I also see a lot of work going into continuous authentication. I think there's a lot of benefit there from the perspective of security, and also the value of the logs that we can get from that would be huge, and that'll feed right into the zero trust model. But I have more, but
No, you got 3 more working groups. We have the low code working group. There's almost a holy war between the development people and then the low code people, and then obviously we do have an identity management group, and then you supply chain risk management. That's something we're forming right now. I don't think there's anything from your perspective, from the government perspective, like we're going to authorize companies. But how's the government manage this? So we're trying to kind of look from the government perspective. So thank you for bringing that up. Adam, where are we going to be with the workforce or whatever else?
Well, that depends. So, we're working on the federal workforce to start, and we're using that model to better inform what we can do for state, local, tribal, and then, strengthen those international alliances. And all of that comes down to how well we execute on interagency coordination. So provided, from the standpoint of the federal government, provided we use a quality service management office to help establish best practices that codify the standards based off of the requirements from whatever department or departments or agencies that we're interfacing with, you maintain a baseline standard of operation within that architecture. Provided we do those things, we remain flexible, as was just said, and we focus on, we have to pay attention to the words in the statement of work or statement of objectives, but making sure that we provide a little bit of latitude so that we don't fail to innovate along the process. Along that process, we could probably create something that's significantly better and significantly cheaper for the workforce that will ultimately then yield benefits to that workforce.
Great. Well put. Justin? We're
Yeah.
going to still be talking about like for like. I hope not.
No, I do see there'll be some agencies that are going to move some of their modernization forward, and there are some that are doing that. You know, it's actively going on. We are seeing a lot doing like for like, unfortunately, but pressures are what they are, and some of them, if the size is too big, it just gotta do it to meet the deadlines. We understand but we will continue saying, please modernize, and offering the tools and things that we have. And we do have solicitation templates for modernizing your WAN and move to SD-WAN. And as Jim said on previous panel, we've added some services to the contract, like SD-WAN service and a broadband internet service, just to get the low cost internet, and modified managed security service to add trusted internet connection service. The whole idea there is to try to pave the way so that folks can take these things and run with them.
Well, they might not even know. They're going to cut and paste all your stuff, put it in there, and next thing you know, they're getting modernization they didn't even know they were getting. So that's, hopefully if they do that, we're going to be in good shape. And
that's one of the other things is our message is, please be open to alternative solutions. Don't prescribe exactly what you want. Because if they did something over for another agency, a service provider, and it worked out very well and the requirements are similar, listen to it. Maybe it's a good step. And that's what we're trying to do with the ATARC demonstration center concept, is to try to make it safe. Hey, we tried it in the demonstration center. It's going to be okay for me. And we have the blessing of the CISA or the CDM or Sean's group with Zero Trust, TIC 3.0, et cetera, et cetera. And Jonathan, I'm going to give you the last word. Where are we going to be as a society and with all these, all the companies that you deal with? What's good? What's security going to look like in IT modernization in a year? Where do you think we're going to be?
So it's going to be faster. It's going to be 5G speeds. It's going to be much more distributed because of digital transformation. So much more SD-WAN that drives SD-WAN, and then SASE, as Justin spoke earlier. And then all that infrastructure spending, look for massive development around edge compute, IoT, and big data. Big data drives smart technologies and green technologies. And so that is where the frontier of security is going to be. And so we're going to do iterative, one step forward, one step back in many ways, but look for the infrastructure spend to drive security around big data on the edge.
Yep, I think we were just reading about that today. That's another $3 trillion they're talking about, and security and modernization will be a big part of that. Well, thank you to the panelists, Jonathan, Justin, Adam, and Cameron. This has been fantastic. I don't know what happened to the time for this summit, but this is the fastest 2 hours and 15 minutes we've had here, I think, at ATARC. This has been fantastic. So just like to thank everybody for sticking it out today. We had a great audience today, and we appreciate it. Hopefully you learned something. We're going to be distributing this out, and our next panel is in a couple of days, and we got a fantastic group here. The impending cybersecurity pandemic. Is your agency prepared? We've got Ross Ford with CISA, the aforementioned CISA, Royce Allen, who's a superstar working in security at the Department of the VA, and then Matt Scholl, who is at NIST and has a lot to do with these standards that we're talking about. So thank you very much. Everybody have a good rest of the afternoon, and we'll catch you next time.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.